Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, or Tank12, however you call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks. We are on the test server this time around, and we're trying out the BZ-75. Now this tank is the brand new and up and coming Chinese tier 10 heavy tank with the new booster mechanic, and it's quite a handful. So let me real quick take away some of the weird equipment choices that I do usually take. And let me just put a turbo on it real quick so that we have the vehicle and the loadout that I would kind of play this tank, or the way I would play it. We're going to focus on this vehicle. In the next video, we're going to try to focus on the tier 9 and then the tier 8 and the tier 7, if we have the ability to actually even play the BZ-58 and the BZ-166, because the test server is not that well populated. Even though it just started, it's like not a lot of players are interested in these vehicles, and I think they're just kind of waiting for the live server to roll around. If you're interested in getting a head start, play the Type 58. You will be able to get the experience that you need for the BZ-58. Overall, it's going to cost you 58,000 experience, I think, for the BZ-58, so it's very much doable. So just play the Type 58 and you're going to be able to get the BZ-58. Really weird and annoying that everything is kind of named the same way, the BZ-58, the Type 58. These numbers and types and all that kind of stuff is really annoying. Also the BZ, I'm not really sure what the BZ stands for, but doesn't really matter. So the very first piece of news that I should probably share with you guys with the BZ-75 is that it does not have the 180mm gun. That big derp gun that fires high explosive rounds and I think another premium high explosive shell. It looks like Wargaming are abandoning that idea, or they haven't added it in the first iteration of the test server, so that might still be coming around in the near future. But we have a very, very competitive 152mm gun where we can actually immediately jump into the characteristics. 650 alpha damage, that's the same that you have on the 60 TP, the E100, and the other heavy tanks that have a caliber of 152mm. You have 3 shell types, AP, heat, and high explosive, and all of them have decent enough shell velocity except for the high explosive shell. High explosive shell only has 860 meters per second shell velocity, but still has 90mm of penetration, which is fairly nice. And also, the high explosive shell, the average damage you do with that shell is 840, and you can roll up to 1050 with that high explosive shell. The heat shell, on the other hand, has 319mm of penetration, 950 meters per second shell velocity. It's nice, but it's not going to be the best heat shell out of the bunch, because in the end, you're going to be facing other tanks that are also really, really well armored at tier 10, and I think 319mm of heat penetration, that's the standard of some tier 9 heavy tanks. But it's fine, I think, because it's going to make this not like, it's still going to be really competitive, but it's just not going to be like a tank that can cut through everything with the heat shell. The AP shell, on the other hand, is fairly nice, especially considering the shell velocity, which is 1150 meters per second, so it travels extremely fast, and it's basically on the level of an APCR shell. You also have 258mm of penetration, which is nice, but it's nothing to write home about. So let's take a quick look at the rate of fire. Rate of fire, and with everything, if you have the crew skills, if you have premium consumables, if you have gun rammer class 1, and also the field upgrade, plus the directives, the rate of fire is actually not too bad. 12.8 seconds for a 152mm caliber gun is not too shabby in my opinion, but it's a very, very expensive setup that we're running right now. And if we wouldn't have the field modifications, if we wouldn't have Brothers in Arms, and we don't have the improved ration, it goes up to 15 seconds for a single shot. But I do highly advise or recommend using Brothers in Arms and certainly the gun rammer, because having more DPM is always a great choice. Speaking of that, moving on to the gun traverse speed, the tank and the turret turns really slowly. The tracks turn really fast. So it's a bit awkward. I'm currently using the improved rotation mechanism. I actually wanted to add the turbo, but I made a mistake. If you have the improved rotation mechanism, you can see that the gun traverse speed does improve by a bit. But if you have the turbo on it, you're going to be able to go faster. This tank has boosters, so you might be thinking, why would I add the turbo? But the thing is, I kind of just go through my boosters really quickly because it's so much fun to boost and go like 58 kph from basically 0 to 58 in like 2 seconds. And that's why I like to have the booster, just to have that additional speed when I lose all my boosts. This tank has 8 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of gun elevation. It was supposed to have 10 degrees back in the days when they first introduced, I think, the line. But it looks like all of the tanks now have 8 degrees. I have checked the tier 9, I've checked the tier 10. I'm not entirely sure if the tier 7 and 8 have more than 8 degrees, but I doubt it. We can check real quick to see how much gun depression the tier 8 actually has. And we can just go to the vehicle itself. It actually has 10 degrees of gun depression, so that's quite nice. And they did decide to decrease the gun depression on the tier 9 and the tier 10. Because you can see that the tier 7 also has the 10 degrees of gun depression. And the premium tank also has the 10 degrees of gun depression. While the tier 8, then tier 9 and the tier 10, they don't have that luxury. So it has been nerfed a little bit. Aim time's not too bad. Dispersion is pretty impressive for a caliber like this large gun. And the average damage per minute is not too shabby either. So I think this gun is actually fairly competent, and it's pretty, well, it's a pretty good gun. It's doing its job, and the shell velocity is great. And you can actually see that in the gameplay. So let's talk about survivability. Is this tank completely broken, or is it actually kind of balanced in the armor layout? I think, generally speaking, this is a tank that is more balanced than broken, and I think that is a very nice way to go forward from wargaming in terms of protection and survivability. This tank has 2 cupolas, which can be penetrated by standard shells, and they are very prominent. You have 2 of them, and this tank can not go into a hull down position where it can just be completely invincible, and you have these cupolas. So that's a really, really good added benefit. The lower plate is also very thin. It reminds me of the 113's lower plate, and reminds me of the WZ-114's lower plate. So generally speaking, the tank can be taken out of combat fairly easily if you aim at the lower plate or you go through the turret. Other than that, the turret is very well armored at the front. You have these crazy angles here. And you also have some very good armor at the upper plate of the tank. So it's not completely, like, easy to go through. But at the same time, if you aim for the weak spots, you should be able to do damage to this vehicle. So even in a hull down position, this vehicle can be touched and it can be destroyed. 200mm of frontal armor though on the hull, 110 on the side, 60 at the back. If you have high explosive that really has a lot of penetration, you can easily go through the back. You have 330mm at the front of the turret, which is very, very thick, but 165 on the side, and it's really, really flat. Now, if this tank does turn its turret and it turns it really slow, you're going to be able to get some easy shots into the side of the turret to take it out. Also, one thing I did notice is that the ammo rack is kind of really, really easy to detonate. I've been detonated twice in about 10 games, so just a heads up for you guys. Moving on to mobility, this tank does weigh 65 tons. It's very similar to the prior tank, the BZ-75, the tier 9 version. It has 860 or 800 horsepower, and with the engine power, with the boosters, it's going to be like a whopping 2,150 horsepower per ton, or horsepower on the vehicle. And you can see the specific power to weight ratio is really bad if you don't have the boosters on, and it's really, really good with the boosters on. 41 kph in top speed going forwards, 17 in reverse if you're using the turbo. Without the turbo, it would be something along the lines of 35 and 15. You can see top speed with the boosters can be 62 kph or 1 kph in reverse. So yeah, that's pretty damn impressive. Traverse speed is not too bad either, 38.7 degrees per second. That is with a lot of the skills, but the general outset is, I think, at 32 degrees per second, and you can definitely work with that. You also have 6 boosters, so you can boost 6 times, so 60 seconds in total, and that is, I think, a very good option, and it's a lot of charges. And the issue is that the maps are fairly small, and when you have this many boosts, you basically can reach any part of the map very, very quickly most of the time. Once you run out of the boost, though, the vehicle does become sluggish and slow. Now, let's talk about the view range. It's not too bad. The tank has 390 meters base view range, and it's really interesting because I usually always thought that Chinese tanks have bad view range, but it's not the case. So with a little bit of crew training, with some consumables, you can get it all the way to 465, and you have yourself a tank that is able to spot for itself and is not reliant on any kind of support from light tanks or medium tanks. So, having talked about all of that, let's talk real quick about the ammunition, and then we can jump into a game. So the ammunition on this vehicle is a bit special. You have 30 rounds in total, and to be fair, 30 rounds with this alpha is more than enough. But at the same time, if a game goes on longer, you might find yourself short on shells. Might be the case, but usually it won't happen. Just so you know. So we're gonna jump into some games, and I'm gonna give you guys my preview, my opinion on the vehicle, how to play it, if it is fun, if it is broken in any kind of way, shape, or form. But I think so far the tank is actually, it's going to be a vehicle that will be liked by a lot of players, but it doesn't seem to be a tank that is completely broken. It just has a lot of alpha. It has enough protection to protect itself from like crazy high explosive damage or from incoming random shots where they don't aim. Most of the time this vehicle is going to be quite competitive in most scenarios. It has 8 degrees of gun depression, not the 10 degrees that it has promised, but I think still with the 8 degrees you're going to be able to do some damage with it. So let's jump into some gameplays, and then we can talk a bit more about the combat effectiveness of the vehicle. So it turns out this is actually a pretty balanced setup this time around. This could actually be a game on the live server, because the players, when the patch will hit the live server, players always rush to the tier 10s, and basically you're gonna have quite a bunch of BZ-75s running around when the patch comes out eventually. And I think right now this is about like what you can expect. We have quite a few medium tanks, we have a few tank destroyers as well, and we're gonna try to take an aggressive position at F5. And I just want to show you the rocket boosters. The issue is there's a bridge, and when you're using the rocket boosters, sadly, the mobility is quite nice, or at least the top speed is quite nice, but your ability to maneuver is sadly pretty damn restricted. I think you'll notice that if you've played the tier 8, sadly you'll see that it's a pretty common theme there, where players boost and they're unable to go any further because of the the lack of wow, okay, because of the lack of the mobility, turn time, and everything. So sadly this tank is also very, very often caught and set on fire. I'm not sure what it is. It could be that the boosters actually provide like an additional problem with firefighting capabilities, because these boosters, since these are rocket propelled, if somebody hits them, it might just be the case that they might knock it out. So sadly, because we had like 2 tanks in front of us, we weren't able to get into the position fast enough, and yeah, we got punished while crossing here because we were the slowest out of the bunch. But you can still see like this gun is serious. It's not like an inaccurate piece of shit. It's actually a gun that is really, really competitive, and the shell speed, the velocity of the shell is pretty impressive too, because you're always going to be able to have like very good direct shots that usually land on target immediately. So let's take a look at the lower plate. Lower plate is fairly vulnerable, as you can see right there. We put one into the BZ-75, And I'm slowly but surely just trying to back up because we have quite a bit of traffic around here. And I actually just want to get the hell out of here because we have a Leopard 1 on the side and we are getting pushed by a BZ-75 and our engine is still kind of broken. So I think that Leo 1 is going to turn around and is going to put some pressure on us. We can switch to the high explosive shell just for that Leo 1 so I can show you guys the impressive penetration, but turns out we don't have the chance to actually shoot the Leo 1, so we're just going to turn around and engage the BZ-75. And we're getting out of this mess because this is the last place we want to find ourselves in. So we're just going to jump into the water. We are going to use the boosters to allow us to get in this position here, and we still die because we sadly didn't have enough boost to get away. But yeah, I think I'm gonna leave this in here. We're just gonna jump into the next match afterwards, but I'm gonna leave this in here because you could see that the vehicle's lower plate is easily penetratable with 258mm of penetration. That means all tier 10 standard rounds usually shouldn't have a problem going through this tank on the lower plate, but the turret is quite sturdy, and also you get set on fire quite often. That's just something you kind of have to get used to when you're playing this vehicle. But the boosters are really nice. You could see like how quickly we managed to run over here, and we almost were able to kind of hide ourselves in like the corner of this building. But either way, we're gonna jump into the next game, and I'm gonna just show you guys the strength of the vehicle when it is really in its element. Sadly, I cannot show you any replays because my replay files cannot be viewed. It's somehow bugged on the test server, so yeah, we'll have to do this while playing the game and hopefully getting the best result. So it's going to be a bit, how can I say, well, not very well edited, or I cannot really cherry pick the games. I guess we just have to take what we get. We're playing on Fjords, and the game that I wanted to show you guys was with, like, was on the map Karelia, and what was so nice about that game was that it basically had a very nice balance of other tanks that were not the BZ-75. Sadly now I can't show you that because the replay files cannot be replayed, sadly, but we're just gonna make the best of it. We're playing on Fjords, and we're gonna take an advanced position here, where we hopefully can shoot some of the guys that are trying to cross over to the B7 area. But I just saw that nobody's actually going up that kind of A8 area where you usually have some of the snipers trying to, you know, shoot anyone trying to get access to this position. This is the test server, so as always, test server gameplay is very much limited to weird plays and usually does not show like any real gameplay because players are incredibly aggressive and they don't really care about anything because it's not the resources that they lose. They just want to try out these tanks and they don't care about winning or losing. And I think that's why the test servers are really messy and difficult to kind of work in your favor, especially if you're trying to try out several things. Right there, I wanted to show you guys the high explosive shell that seriously does some real damage when you find one of those really lightly armored vehicles. We just penned that AMX 13105 for a whopping 861. Yeah, so don't forget about the high explosive shells, 90mm of penetration. It's not the best, it's not on the level of a chieftain, but it's fairly good. It's really, really nice to have against vehicles that are very lightly armored. Now, one more thing I wanted to talk about is the definitely the gun and the armor, but what you can see right here is, like, especially when you're turning your tank, the side of the hull, or the side of the turret is a real easy target to penetrate, and the STRV was able to actually go right through our gun mantlet. So it's like this tank, it is very well armored, but if you are not in a hull down position and you cannot protect the cupolas there, you're gonna have a bit of a hard time. And I think that's a good way, because the gun itself is really, really competitive. This is a great gun. This is a real fun tank in terms of having boosters and having this great gun at the same time. That's just already like making this a very, very good kind of vehicle. A very good vehicle that, like, usually several tanks have to have like where several tanks have like these specific kind of traits, but they really specialize on them. You basically have several of these traits, making this tank really, really good. I'm not gonna say overpowered in that sense, but it's definitely a good tank, a tank that is going to be able to do quite a bit of damage and is going to be a really, really good tank in capable hands. So we have one right here. Sadly, we only track him this time around, and we do not penetrate his back. But one of the things you have to kind of work with is the accuracy of 0.34, right? That's currently what we are on. It's decent. I think it's actually pretty damn good, especially considering like this caliber of a gun. But with the aim time on top of it, like, snapshots are a bit difficult sometimes. But if you had like crazy snapshots, ooh, things would certainly be a lot more, or it would tend much more towards the OP category, because we're using a lot of the premium consumables right now. If this tank is like a lot better and we are not using premium consumables, and now we're using the premium consumables on top of that, we might have a tank that is really, really powerful. But so far, I think if we consider the vehicles they've put into the game, if we consider the Minotaur, if we consider some of other tier 10 tanks that we have in the game, for example, the Kranwagen, I think this vehicle is in a sense, in a balanced state. I'm not saying it's fully balanced, because having 6 of these boosts is still plenty, and also having like such a short reload time is pretty crazy as well. Look at that, we just hit a Leopard 1 for 698, and the shell velocity is just insane. That's really, really good shell velocity. Now, I haven't shown you guys the heat shells, but we're going to switch over to the heat shells real fast. What is going on in the test server? Basically, everyone is just getting ammo wrecked right now. It's so weird. But the heat shells, well, they're basic heat shells. They work the way you expect them to work. And I've barely had to use them so far, because the tank, usually with its 258 millimeters of penetration, is going to be able to do the damage. And also, you can overmatch a lot of like roof armors and decks, because you just have like a huge boomstick of 152 millimeter caliber that allows you to basically shoot anyone and still be able to go right through. So this game is wrapping up. We did 3,600 damage. A pretty quick game as well. A team on the enemy side, they did fall apart quite quickly. I think this is a good time to wrap up and talk a little bit about the vehicle and to give a final verdict on this preview. So far, I think the tank in its armor composition is fair. It's a tier 10 vehicle that reminds me of the T110E5, in the case that the turret is actually quite sturdy, but once you're able to hit one of those weak spots, it's basically all bets are off and everyone can take care of your vehicle. Now, hitting these 2 weak spots, these two cupolas, is not the easiest of things, but you can basically still guarantee to take the vehicle out if it's on a ridgeline. You have 8 degrees of gun depression, which allows it to be quite proficient on a ridgeline, but it doesn't have the 10 degrees of gun depression that the BZ-176 has. Now, the BZ-176 doesn't have any real, any real weak spots on the turret, well, this tank has. So basically that's a good thing. And the lower plate, there's no bullshit where there's like a protruding plate that is just as thick as the upper plate. It's basically the lower plate is thin, you go through, you're able to shoot it, you're able to pen it. That's how it should be, and I think that's a great way. So survivability wise, this tank is in a decent place, and I cannot complain too much about it. Moving on to firepower. The gun itself is great. Standard pen is decent. Shell velocity on the standard AP shell is amazing. The turret traverse is slow. The rate of fire is maybe a bit high if you have all of the, you know, specials that I'm using, the premium consumables, the gun rammer, if you're using Brothers in Arms, all of those things. Dispersion wise, the tank is fairly accurate for the caliber. Aim time, well, it's decent as well. I think it's a very good package that makes it actually a really good package when you have the jet boosters, and that is where we might have a bit of a problem. This is a tank that will definitely become a meta tank. It's fast, it has these boosters, it has a great gun. You don't have to spam the heat shells, but you can spam the heat shells if you want. It's reliable. The armor is not the worst, but it's like not the best either. So it's not going to draw like all of the players to play it, but it might draw in quite a few players who like to play heavy tanks that are faster and where they want to use like this special ability, which is the turbo, the jet boosters. So yeah, I think this tank is a pretty damn nice vehicle that is going to be added to the game. And so far, if they nerfed it a little bit more, for example, if they took away maybe 2 or 1 of the jet boosters, it would already be a bit better. I think maybe taking away 2 jet boosters would be the best, because the mobility on this tank right now with the small maps is insane. It's crazy. I didn't have to use all of the boosts right there. I was in an aggressive position. I boosted once to get into that position, and it was enough. Now, obviously, it's not going to save your skin all of the time, but having these boosters is a great advantage that other vehicles don't have, and you also have like decent armor, and you also have a decent gun. So that means you have a really good package. That in of itself doesn't mean that the tank is overpowered, but it shows that the tank is a bit, well, it's going to be a meta tank because it has all of the things combined, and it makes it a really good tank. Having said all of that, I would like to hear your opinion. What do you think of the BZ-75? Have you played it? If not, are you looking forward to it? Are you going to get this vehicle? Are you going to be playing the Chinese new line? I'm personally going to be preparing the Type 58 for the BZ-58. So I'm going to try to get through this line if I can. And the next video I want to do is on the BZ-68, but there's still first some other videos that are coming. But the BZ-68 is the next review, and I want to see what the tank is like when it actually is at tier 9, because a lot of the characteristics are very similar to the tier 10 in terms of gun depression, in terms of mobility, in terms of armor as well, except for the gun. It's not the same gun, it's a smaller caliber, but at the same time it is still fairly competitive in terms of penetration and dealing damage. Also has decent shell velocity. So, hope you guys did enjoy. As always, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a nice weekend.